including Graham Hancock and the incredible Richard C Hoagland. Richard C Hoagland is a scientist, a visionary, and an author. He is, in our opinion, one of the most brilliant voices on the planet today. And the information that he is about to provide is absolutely amazing, utterly astonishing.
Thank you.
A round of applause for Richard, please. Amazing information. Absolutely brilliant information. And I was just blown away by that patient. Hi, my name is James Tyberonn, and I am with the incredible Richard C Hoagland at the Earthkeeper event in Scottsdale, Arizona. Richard Hoagland has been one of our featured speakers with Graham Hancock, so we are going to just take a few moments to talk with Richard, because the work that he is doing is really cutting edge. And it really makes the connection. Part of our goal at Earthkeeper is to bring the science into the metaphysics, and he is doing cutting edge work that provides a lot of the connection between our understandings of physics and metaphysics. So thank you, Richard, very much for being here. What a brilliant talk.
And my pleasure. Thank you.
And so just to start off with, can you just give a rather brief explanation as to torsion physics? And I know that's a difficult question, but just sort of a 5-minute explanation to the viewers on exactly what is meant by torsion physics.
Okay, well, the term torsion physics comes from the first detectors that people like Nikolai Kozyrev, who was a famous Russian astrophysicist in the 50s and 60s and 70s, was using to measure the properties of this otherwise invisible field. And he called it a torsion field because he used what's called a torsion pendulum, which is a basic mass structure set on a pivot, like a needle, and it's like a balance, except instead of going up and down like a teeter-totter, it rotates left or right. And what he found in his laboratory work is that certain processes, certain material processes like sugar dissolving in water, or if he was quietly sitting reading a book and came to a really exciting emotional passage, or if he aimed it through a telescope so that the telescope would be focused on the detector and he aimed at a certain stars or the moon or the center of the galaxy, he got changes in the angle of rotation. And some of the changes were like it would slowly pivot and then stop. Other changes, it would cycle back and forth.
Right.
And some days the changes would be larger than other days when the changes would be smaller. So he called it a torsion field because it was torquing the pendulum, the torsion pendulum. But it really is the ether.
Okay.
It's the good old classic non-electromagnetic ether, the invisible substance supposed to pervade the universe and provide the carrier for both matter and energy in the EM, the electromagnetic realm that we normally measure, or things like gravity fields and whatever. What's underneath all of that stuff is this primordial torsion field, the ether. And what we're doing is we're measuring the effects of the change pattern in the field on the motion of a little tuning fork in a commercial Bulova Accutron watch.
Yes.
It was brought out in the 60s by the Bulova Watch Company.
Right.
The reason that's interesting is that the vibration of a tuning fork is, if you look at it fundamentally, it's no different than the rotation of a torsion pendulum. A tuning fork vibration is constrained rotation because it can't go all the way around.
Right.
But it's still a partial rotation. So what I thought I would do is I would digitize the output through a sensor system. So I'm picking up the vibration of the fork, I'm digitizing it, putting it into a computer, I'm looking at the frequency changes of the tuning fork, of which there should be none. There should be a totally flat line at 360 cycles per second.
Right.
Instead, as you've seen in this data presentation, we get, during astronomical conjunctions, during eclipses, during transits of Venus, during where the moon and the sun and other things align, and at sacred sites all over the world, we get enormous changes in the vibration rate of the tuning fork. Now, the theory that explains why there are changes when there should be none is that the mass of the tuning fork, if you reduce everything else, that's what's got to be changing. Something about the field, what we're immersed in, this invisible matrix of reality, causes mass, causes things to have weight, to have resistance to motion, to have inertia, to when you shove them, it's easier to shove a feather than a piano. Something about moving things in this field, the field can change the resistance to movement. And it can either increase that resistance, meaning the vibration is slower, or it can radically decrease the resistance, meaning the vibration is much faster, or the mass of the tuning fork has been reduced. Now, this is in contravention to everything we have been taught for the last 100 years. Mass cannot be changed. You have to get up to the speed of light to observe mass changes. Electrons whirling around and accelerators are moving at the speed of light, therefore you see those mass. This is all relativity. This throws relativity, as we know it, into a cocked hat and opens the door to a totally new paradigm. Because the really important thing that we found at Chichen Itza, when we measured the field and the changes there over the end of the Bayan calendar, the 13th Baktun, just before the solstice, we found, and I've recorded and I just showed, measurements of consciousness. Human beings focused in meditation. We can just watch the changes in the Accutron before they meditated, during their meditation, when they got freaked out because the federales tried to move them someplace during their meditation.
But the consciousness is shown as an increase in the Hertzian field?
Exactly. It's an increase or a decrease in the inertia of the tuning fork changing its vibration. But having nothing to do with electromagnetism. This is not electromagnetism, this is the fundamental stuff. Now, there are a lot of other experiments that I didn't show, which show that biology and consciousness, the so-called biofield of all living things, from plants to algae to microbes to human beings to horses, are alive because of this torsion field interaction. If they weren't, we wouldn't classify them as living beings, living creatures. And we can measure, I haven't done it yet, but other workers have done this, changes, Kozyrev did it, changes in biology. Healthy plants versus unhealthy plants produce changes in his torsion pendulum on different days. He also measured seasonal changes. he was able to do experiments fairly easily from like September, October, November, December. But the same experiments he would try during January, February, March, April, nothing would happen. Now science is supposed to be replicable, right?
Yes.
From which he theorized that there was something changing about the Earth seasonally that was causing changes in the relationship between the field and his experiments. What I found from our work is that one single parameter that changes is our angular relationship with the center of the galaxy. The 4+ million solar mass black hole spinning at 11 times per second, 26,000 light years away. And some of those really bizarre readings I got that I showed on the screen,
yes.
Those occurred at specific angles between the sun, the Earth, and the galactic center.
At what angles specifically?
I don't remember.
Okay. Richard, I'd like to, one of the things that I think...
and I have to wait a whole year to do it again.
Yes, to get the...
Part of the problem of this kind of science is you have to wait for the cosmic forces to realign. That's not a metaphorical statement, that's a real statement. So next year, in the same time frame, I'll be doing the measuring in the same place.
And we will have you back.
And then we'll compare notes.
Well, there's a few questions, and I'd like to just sort of jump around for our viewers just a little bit, but so much of the work that you've done is fascinating. Arthur C. Clarke, the author of 2001, which Jane Roberts Seth called one of the most important works of our time, Arthur C. Clarke referred to as a genius. And there is one section where, in the movie 2001, of course, they use a moon of Jupiter. But there is the section where they find the moon of Saturn, Iaepetus, and when the
that's in the novel.
In the novel. Yeah. When the man goes inside, he says, "Oh my God, it's full of stars," and that made that just sent energy up and down my arms. And
well,
you have studied. Do you feel like Iaepetus is a man-made satellite?
Yes, yes.
And that's the question.
Yeah.
Do you think our moon is?
No. I think our moon has been modified. I think a lot of stuff was built on top of it.
And put in place exactly where it is?
I think the moon was moved in place. And the reason, this goes back to the biology. Since the physics depends on a quantity called angular momentum, the more spin, the bigger the mass, the bigger the torsion effect. Until the moon was moved into position, he said calmly, the only life forms available on the Earth were blue-green algae. For billions of years. Scientists look at this and they've had all kinds of theories. Oh, there wasn't enough oxygen, you couldn't have complex creatures. Well, come on. A bacterium is chemically as complex as you or I. There's just more of us. So why would... No, see, they're reaching because they don't have a theory that can encompass a fundamental, which is if you change the torsion field significantly, you allow conscious biology, complex life forms, us, ultimately. If you keep it simple, you only can have simple life forms. So by adding the moon, and I can tell you when the moon was added to the Earth-Moon system.
Please.
600 million years ago. That's when we have something in the biological record, which is a geologist you're familiar with.
And then is that around the Cambrian radiation?
It's the Cambrian explosion.
Yes, yes.
This explains the Cambrian explosion.
Absolutely.
This, when they brought the moon in, they did a few other things to the system, by the way, which we've measured. We haven't published this yet, but I'm building a database for the next book in the sequence, which is going to be called The Heritage of Mars, Remembering Forever. Is part of Monuments of Mars, the city on the edge of forever, which I stole from Harlan Ellison by way of Gene Roddenberry from Star Trek. When the moon was added, it allowed complex life forms and consciousness in this nursery, in this cradle, in this school. And the moon was brought here, modified to perform that function. Then something awful happened about 65 million years ago. And what we're seeing all over the system is ruins. Yeah. We see all this amazing architecture, planetary architecture, designed and built by a Type II civilization, as I decoded, now in ruins. And we need to find out what happened, because...
And you think that was 65 million years ago?
When the dinosaurs died.
Right.
Because that's when
somebody
somebody blew an entire planet to smithereens, which is why we have the remains of the asteroid belt.
Right.
The chunks that hit the planets caused terrible havoc and destruction. The sleet storm of small debris literally scoured, sandblasted all these amazing structures, which is why there's almost nothing left on the moon, except the moon has two hemispheres, right?
Right.
It's got the side we see, which is pretty much destroyed. It's got the side we don't see, called the far side, because it rotates in synchronization with its orbit around the Earth. Our model says that originally, before this event, the side we can see was on the front. It was rotated 90 degrees. And the side that we don't see was on the 90 degrees on the right, which means as the moon moved around in orbit, the front could get sandblasted, the back was better preserved. So we find structures more surviving in the Apollo database on the far side of the moon and at the lunar poles, which would also have been more protected than on the front side, which after the Imbrium impact, which was the final event in this catastrophic war,
yes,
it rotated at 90 degrees, and now we see the battered side facing the Earth, the man in the moon, the Mario, all that.
And so the idea is that the moon was actually put in place at this specific rotational level that it is. Distance-wise, I mean, it is amazing that the moon perfectly covers the sun.
As part of the lesson,
yes,
to teach the consciousness developing on Earth, as part of this elaborate process, this is the physics whereby you were brought into being.
And who put it in place? Who had the technology? This is a highly advanced society.
The honest answer is I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I'm going to find out.
But it is fascinating. And
how are we going to find out?
Yes, how?
We have to find the libraries. Obviously, if someone did this, they left records. There's the Cathy thing about the Hall of Records under the Sphinx. I have a feeling that if they're there, they've long been found by the Egyptians and kept secret, like Zahi would not share.
And let me ask you this, and if you'll allow me to interject. And I've thought a lot about this. Because I lived overseas, I've lived in the Amazon jungle for a number of years and spent 7 years in Africa, went through 3 coups d'etats. I never watched television. I read. At one point, I had read every single book the A.R.E., the Association for Research, the Edgar Cayce Foundation, had. Now, Cayce mentions the Hall of Records in 3 locations of the Earth, and he primarily associates them to Atlantis. Mm-hmm. And I thought, if Atlantis was so highly advanced, they're not going to put hieroglyphics on walls. Could it be possible that they had, like was shown in the Superman movie, a crystal that projected a hologram with amazing amounts of information? Could it be possible that the original crystal skulls were computers? And as far as research shows, there is only 2 crystal skulls that appear to be truly ancient. The one called Max and the one called Sha-Na-Ra, that was discovered by Nick Nisarino. The Mitchell Hedges is pretty compelling evidence that it was sold at Sotheby's auction house. There's photographs, there's records of it being bought by Mitchell Hedges. Not to say that that type of quartz is not incredibly powerful, it is, but it may not necessarily be, and not to say that all quartz isn't millions of years old, it is, but that perhaps these ancient skulls were some sort of computer system that could project.
I think you're close. When NBC Sci-Fi came to me, they literally came to Albuquerque to film a segment on our work for their special on the crystal skulls.
Yes.
And Robin and I always wondered, why did they do that? And the guy is sitting in our living room, and he's filming me, and he looks at me and he says, how would you like your own special on NBC? And I knew instantly what the game was. And I said, I don't think so. This producer freaked out. And we've got it on 8, because I had Robin running our HD camera just to film his reaction. They had set up this segment, obviously in the Crystal Skull special, as a way to test me and test the audience to see whether our material would get good numbers, because television's all about ratings,
Right,
right?
yeah.
When they got great numbers, because they ran that thing dozens of times, they came back to me and they actually did a whole special on our work, flew us to Teotihuacan, to Tikal. I got excellent measurements that I just showed at the presentation, courtesy of NBC. When they wanted me to be part of the Crystal Skull special, I decided, okay, it's time to extend our work into that realm. I'd had some thoughts, but there's too much to do in life, not enough time to do it.
Right,
rule of thumb.
Yeah.
So you can only really focus on the things that are right kind of in front of you, that are relevant to
Yes.
something a few months or weeks ahead. When I had the deadline of being ready to do that segment for that special, I did a lot of background research on the crystal skulls. I had met Nick years ago at the in the Bay Area at some conference.
Yeah.
He'd shown me the skull. He was all excited.
This one.
This one.
Yeah.
I knew nothing then about the history, the politics, the soap opera, the Mitchell Hedges claims or counterclaims or whatever. I just knew these were really interesting objects. They had been found in indigenous keeping. People were trying to bring them forward, and people like Nick were trying to explain how they could be done in a technology where the tools didn't exist to make them the way we can see them.
Yeah.
So as I'm getting ready to do the Crystal Skull special for Sci-Fi and NBC, I start connecting some of our work with the work on the crystal skulls. And the key part is that when Kozyrev was doing his torsion experiments, one of the things he investigated were the torsion properties of quartz. Remember what the geometry of the quartz crystal is? It's hexagonal. It's the encoded double tetrahedron. You have rotating atomic components in the right geometry to resonate with the torsion field. So bottom line, I think not only are they computers, I think they were specifically left for us by either this advanced culture who put everything in place, or a subsequent advanced culture, maybe ourselves. And let me finish the thought. I think their purpose is not to project stuff on walls or whatever. I think it's to interact directly with a living torsion field receptor.
Yes.
And that's why when people go and they look at, they think they're seeing things optically. No, they're downloading the information stored in the crystal lattice accessible from the torsion field, because we resonate with the life bioenergy, which is the torsion field. That's what I think is going on. And now that you've got Nick's skull here, the next time we do this, I will bring the Accutron and I will demonstrate how all this marvelous quartz resonates.
The other fascinating skull, the only other skull tested by the British Museum and proven not to have carbide residue, not to have telltale marking, and it was determined to be truly an ancient skull, is the one that's called Max. It is kept by a lady by the name of Joanne Parks, and came out of Guatemala as well, and was in the hands of a Tibetan monk.
Is that the one out of rosy quartz?
No.
Okay.
No, this is the one. It's the largest of the crystal skulls, and it's incredibly impressive. And it actually has 5 separate growth centers. It should not have been possible to carve because they will not cohere. But Max has 5 separate growth centers, separate growth points of quartz that are spherical and are formed into a crystal skull. So it is absolutely astonishing. And there are some amazing photographs similar to the ones that you've seen of Sha-Na-Ra today, and one in which... And it is,
wait. You say are the 5 growth centers symmetric?
No.
Okay.
No. And,
they're interpreted as growth centers, right?
Yes, by Robert Schoch.
What if they're not? What if it's not natural quartz? What if it was grown specifically, and those growth centers are places where information is encoded?
Exactly. And of an extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
And Marcel Vogel had a theory called the missing lattice theory, and he reckoned that the silicon atom in the tetrahedral quartz molecule was occasionally missing.
Right.
And it was what he called an information white hole. And then that is what allowed quartz to be transmitters, receivers, and programmable.
I think he's right.
And,
but see, he didn't know about
But
torsion.
that was only proven after his life,
Yeah.
after he died.
Yeah.
And
when the NBC folks came to us, I suggested to them that they actually go to Russia and they get some Russians who have the torsion, they're the best in the world with torsion technology for sensing, and take one of the skulls, like Max, and have the Russians test it for torsion.
that would be amazing.
And they couldn't do it because they couldn't afford it. They were at the end of their budget, you know.
Yeah.
The segment with me was obviously not.
The next time you come, we'll arrange for Max to be here.
Okay.
And Max is an astonishing skull. And I sincerely believe, and science backs this up to a certain degree, that Sha-Na-Ra, the Nocerino skull, and the Joanne Park skull, Max, are the only two that are truly ancient. And there's a lot of politics and a lot of hoopla around crystal skull sites. I think these are the only two truly original ones. But I think all quartz, to a certain degree, will download what's inside them. Because
Which was the one that Hewlett-Packard measured?
I think it was the one that did not pass, or the one that did.
The one that did.
I think it was Max.
Okay.
Yeah. And another question that I was going to ask you, you're familiar with the work of Bruce Cathy
Yeah, of
in
course.
New Zealand, the Harmonic
In
cycle.
fact, I have a weird hyperdimensional resonance synchronicity. When we did our Joshua Tree conference, one of the places I wanted to measure for torsion was the Integratron, which is out there in the California
big
desert,
rock,
that big
yeah.
dome.
They call it the Armstone sometime, or
I've only
Oh,
heard
it's
it
the dome, yeah.
as the Integratron. It's
Yeah.
built out of wood, no nails.
Yeah.
There were crystals emplaced in it. And Van Tassel, who's the guy who built it, claimed he got his blueprints from ETs.
Yes.
He never finished it. And then he died, and it's passed from hand to hand to hand. And finally, during the conference, I was out there measuring. Well, one of the people that showed up for the conference, in the middle of the Integratron, comes up to me and says, "Mr. Hoagland," this is after we'd done ceremony with singing bells, and I'm doing the measurements.
Bruce Cathy.
She brings a book, and she says, "I want to give you this book." I opened it up. It was Harmonic 33. It was signed by Cathy, and she wanted to give it to me she had no idea how Cathy feeds into our research,
Yes.
how he was definitely onto something. I don't know that he's still around.
I don't think he is. He was a couple of years ago, and
But
he lived in New Zealand.
Yeah, it was a New Zealand airline pilot.
Yes.
And he started
they called
looking
him Captain Cathy.
Yeah, he started looking at UFO tracks
Right.
and doing geometry. He got into this from the geometry because someone was using geometry as a way of introducing us via the prime directive, which is you can't interfere directly.
Yeah.
You have to give them clues so you don't shock the poor dears. I think that's what Cathy built his work on, that someone was trying to feed information into our modern society about the same physics.
And he had the theory, which he called the harmonic cycle.
Yes.
The idea that antimatter and matter would not annihilate one another. That, they were just different spectrums of the same thing.
Mhm.
One end is an electron of the same, and the opposite end of the spectrum is an anti-electron.
Right.
That they would not annihilate. And I've often wondered, they say that in the universe is, depending on who you listen to, 80% to 93% dark matter.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the idea that the Asians, the ancient Chinese have that the nature of the universe is a snake eating its own tail.
Right, Ouroboros.
And then the torus effect. Could it be that the what we call the angelic realm is the realm of antimatter, the realm of dark matter?
Well, from our work in the field, the torsion field, everything goes through cycles. It could be that matter itself cycles.
Is in spectrums.
In exactly as Cathy suspected.
Mm-hmm.
And that what we are currently inferring is dark matter is simply matter that's not the same properties as the visible matter. And in time it will cycle in phase or in series of phases to where it can be seen and the rest of the universe will be invisible.
There's a doctor in Australia by the name of Jay Alfred. And he has come up with plasma physics.
Okay.
And he projected the idea that the human chakra system, the chakras are particle accelerators to a certain extent, and that inorganic life can exist on the other side in dark matter, in sort of an electrical state of being, in parallel universes.
See, I like the idea that we can measure this stuff, and the better we get at designing detections, and the cleverer we get at the phasing.
Yes, the idea of measurement, yes, absolutely.
You know, that's the cornerstone of what I'm trying to do now.
There was some work by a Russian group that I have in one of my presentations. I lived in Russia for 6 months. That were able to determine that inorganic plasma could organize itself in the same way organic living.
Well, we know that plasmas generate torsion.
Yeah.
We know that torsion creates this geometry in the underlying space-time continuum. So that's totally different here. That's absolutely, plasmas can generate not only torsion fields, they also can be manipulated through electromagnetism, where they will dump excess energy from unseen dimensions, which is why the Russians have been building free energy generators based around plasmas. And the Haarp system, the way we are detecting the torsion fields from Haarp, which I didn't have time to go into in the presentation, is the Haarp beams electromagnetic radiation into the ionosphere. It creates an enhanced plasma in the ionosphere.
Yes.
That plasma is dancing and vibrating at millions of cycles per second in resonance with the EM wave coming from the antennas, like in Alaska.
Yes.
We're picking up the torsion frequencies from that excited plasma. We're not picking up the radio waves, we're picking up the torsion field, but the frequencies match. In other words, the coherent pattern that we're seeing is reflective of the coherent pattern being input from the microwave beam, which tells me, bottom line, Haarp is a good thing, not a bad thing, because the waves we're seeing are all harmonic. Think of a Gregorian chant or fingernails on a blackboard. Someone is trying to stabilize with resonant frequencies the Earth using Haarp to do it, and they put out all these wacko cover stories that it's mind control and it's designed to kill people. No, it's all disinfo, but it's positive disinfo. Because if you have a secret you're trying to keep, which is the world could tip over and everybody would die, you can't tell them that. And you're doing everything you can to keep that from happening. You can't tell them that either. So you have to put out cover stories to cloud your real objective. And we have measured now at Chichen Itza, in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, in Albuquerque, and in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, Haarp-generated torsion frequencies telling me it's worldwide. They're trying to stabilize the planet as we go through this window where the frequencies can get so uneven that the Earth, to basically right itself, has to change physically a parameter, which is its rotational axis spin, which has the bad side effect that, as Carl Sagan used to say, it tends to kill beagles and begonias on the surface. I'm seeing nothing but resonant frequencies. And the fact that they're covering some of the measurements we want to make either is folks trying to tell me something, like in a very heavy-handed way, or the window during an eclipse when they needed to do something coincided with the eclipse, so they had to do the Haarp demo then, broadcast those frequencies then, because the destabilization effect of the alignment would have caused other problems that they could not, and our measurements had nothing to do with it. Again, it's very important not to confuse that you're the center of the universe and that everything you're seeing is directed at you. Although there does seem to be someone trying to communicate something to us, because frankly, outside of the Black Ops community, we have the only functioning non-military civilian torsion field detection system on the planet. And I think somebody starting in Albuquerque is trying to send us little messages, with a sense of humor. Hey, pay attention, guy, you know. Here, we're talking to you, you know. We're trying. If I can decode in the next year the symbology behind that, and I can come back and demonstrate that it's a real message and we figured it out, I'll do that.
Last question, and this will be a brief one. Do you believe, and this is a question that I think everyone thinks a lot considerably about, is do you feel like extraterrestrials exist in other dimensions and that our government is in contact with them?
Well, that's several questions all in one.
It is, yeah.
Okay. First of all, let's have some definitions.
Okay.
To me, an ET is someone who lives off planet.
Yes.
Either human or non-human.
Intelligence.
If they're non-human, they're intelligent, but their DNA is different.
Yes.
If they're human, they're probably family.
Right.
And we're the poor
Yes, we
cousins that they are trying to bring back up to some quasi-level of civilization.
Yeah.
And they're trying to do it with very hands-off, prime directive kind of modalities.
Yes. Yeah.
I think my friend Gene Roddenberry was up to his eyebrows in this conspiracy.
Yes.
I think there's a whole group on this planet that are working toward changing our consciousness to where we can rejoin the family.
Yes.
When people say government, there is no one government. There are factions of government. There are groups within groups within groups. I think there are groups within government who know a lot more about this than we do, because we're on the outside trying to figure it out. I think they're totally human. I think they have worked out a deal with the ETs who are human but don't live here to import technology, to try to change the planet in a positive direction, to, among other things, try to keep it from tipping over, which would kind of cut short the experiment for the time being. And I don't think that they want to tell us, because if you told everybody all this stuff too soon, it would destabilize society in a very negative fashion.
As the Brookings report
you do not want to kill the village to save it.
And Ed Mitchell, I think it was Ed Mitchell, mentioned that he had friends of absolute credibility in high places that told him without a doubt they're here and they're working with us, and that if they were hostile, we wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here.
Richard Hoagland, thank you very much, sir. It is an honor.
Think we don't